I'm Dr. Bill Pemberton, one of the old-timers at 77. And I give you my little bit about Korzybski. In 1935, I was winding up my A.B. degree in philosophy at the University of Washington. And the in thing in the philosophy department was reading Science and Sanity. But the head of the department, a fellow by the name of William Savory, who was a prize student of William James, he said it's too big for me at my age. So I didn't get much into it, just the discussion about it. And then I finished in 36, spent a couple of years working with pick and shovel and whatever was doable in those days, and wildcat oil drilling and all that junk we did, and saved my money and bought a ticket around the world. It cost me $550, clear around the world. Took a year, and then I befriended a chap in London who wanted me to do a PhD in sociology and try to cement relations between ourselves and the Romanians. So I accepted that, went back to Europe in 39 to do this, and I was in Romania in September when they dropped the bombs in Warsaw just over the Carpathians. So I came across Europe on blackout train because our whole sociological survey collapsed. And when I got back to the United States, I was pretty discouraged about the world and prospects for my doctorate, and ran into a friend of a friend, Douglas Gordon Campbell. And he said, well, why don't you get your doctorate here? So through him and through Doug Kelly, I got a hookup, started graduate school at Columbia, and do some work at New York State Psychiatric Institute in projective technology, the Rorschach test and that kind of stuff. Doug Campbell and Doug Kelly, especially Campbell, had promoted Korzybski. He and Congdon had promoted Korzybski, and I think it was William White who told Douglas Campbell that the most promising thing in the field of so-called mental health in those days was Alfred Korzybski. So he sort of glommed on to Korzybski. And of course, since I knew Douglas Campbell then, I bought the book. It was the original one I bought. Pretty good that, but in 1939. So I knew a little bit about Science and Sanity, but I really plunged into it then. And in the end of 39, I went to the Winter Intensive with Douglas Campbell and Douglas Kelly, and Wendell Johnson was there, and Don Hayakawa was there, a whole host of some of the old timers, and Korzybski and I kind of clicked. I think I had picked up some kind of a whatever European mannerisms that you get when you've been in Europe a couple of years, and he was a count, as you know, in the Russian Imperial Army, and he had come to the United States to get munitions. And that's when the October Revolution took place, as you probably know, and so he didn't go back. He made an interesting statement over and over in those days to us that Russia could never amount to anything or produce anything because they killed off all the brains. He was pretty heavy on that statement. Anyway, he found in me some kind of mannerism that he liked. He was sort of the noblesse oblige, the old school tie, so to speak, and we clicked. And so after that, and I went back to do some more work at Columbia, I came through and did Rorschach tests on all of his staff. And I gave him a reading, just inferential stuff on the Rorschach, if you know the Rorschach, and he was quite astounded. He said, "You know more about my staff than I do, and I've known him for 15 years. And he said, "By the way," he said, "you'll never get me to take that damn test." But he said, "They all look like vaginas." And I said, "That's your problem, that's your problem." Anyway, but he thought I was some kind of a genius because I could spot people so well and kind of do things with the Rorschach. So I came out west. In the meantime, Korzybski had 2 seminars in Denver that I attended, and on one of them I remember he was doing the main scene, and he got up in front of the group and said, "Do you want predictability?" And he said it in such a way that nobody understood the word. So there was total silence. And he said it again with shaking his cane. Anyway, we finally got the message. But his accent was pretty thick sometimes. Now, Korzybski, when you would interview him, because he liked to get close-up acquainted, you'd sit across his desk and he would do this thing with his toilet paper. But the next time I saw Korzybski was at after the seminar and follow-up, was at a National Psychiatric Convention in Cincinnati in 1940. And Douglas Campbell, I think, had lined him up to do a plenary session. And all of the big shot psychiatrists from all over the world were there. Anybody in the field of psychiatry was there. And he, on the plenary session, got up and said to all these hotshot therapists, "When one of your patients gets well, you don't know why they get well. When one of your patients doesn't get well, you don't know why they don't get well. But I do." He shook his cane at them, and they all said, "Well, he's a paranoid genius, but more paranoid than genius." And that was sort of the consensus. They pretty much wiped him off. That evening, we met down where they had a bunch of people dancing. The psychiatrists dancing with their wives or whoever they had with them. Douglas Campbell, Doug Kelly, and I think I was sitting at their table, and I saw Korzybski behind a post over there looking on at these guys. So I went up to him. I said, "Albert, what are you up to?" He said, "I'm just watching these men dance. Those who don't have rhythm are not a part of life." Now he makes statements like this, and great, like he and Christ have it all worked out. But that's the way kind of guy he was. And when he gave his seminars, he liked to shock people. He sometimes would take one of his women patients and do a little trick with them. And then he would chuff them, strike them for something. And then he would put their head against his chest, and almost invariably they'd cry. He didn't hurt them any, but he said that is a little gesture that proves something about how you could be traumatized and then it turns into something good and so on. But nearly all of his teaching things were with models, illustrations, demonstrations, and he was a very good teacher. He was courteous, he was charming, but he dressed with khaki shirt, no tie, and khaki trousers, and blew his nose frequently with toilet paper. That was Alfred. But he was very sharp at asking you questions and getting you to think in kind of fresh, creative new ways. I told him that I was going on to get my PhD, and he had heard something about my life and some of the things I'd accomplished, and he said, "I want you to go see The Wizard of Oz." I don't know why, but incidentally, that night I went to see The Wizard of Oz and Don Highcala, and Marge were both there. And that's the first time I'd met Marge. And so I afterwards said, why did you want me to go to The Wizard of Oz? She said, well, you are like the straw man. You solve all the problems, come up with all these ingenious ideas, but you got to prove that you got a brain by getting a PhD. Oh. You're the scarecrow type. you got to go to the wizard to prove that you got to get a PhD to prove that you're a brain. And that was one of his little bits. To me, he was the great genius to come up with his formulations. But some of his statements, like Russia will never amount to anything because it killed off all the brains and things like that, you just have to kind of discount that he was pretty heavily biased.
What did he look like physically?
He was about 5'9", I guess, and what we call a mesomorphic body type. Had shaved head and looked like a thug. He was heavy boned, had been shot up and had a lot of metal plates in him, so it's lucky he lived as long as he did. But he walked with a cane, but he could be very brusque, very powerful voice and brusque. But then you'd see this very charming nobleman come out, and very gifted and knowledgeable guy, because he had a massive library when he was young, and of course he lost it all when he left. So he had a lot of stuff, a lot of happenings that soured him a bit with the world. When I met him, he said, his diagnosis, he said, mankind is hopeless. He'd been around the world between World War I and World War II. When I met him, I'd been around the world between World War I and World War II, and I agreed with him. Only, of course, I said mankind, womankind. We want to leave the ladies out. Because he was brusque, he alienated a lot of people. Because he wanted to play doctor, Douglas had to kind of keep him, and Douglas Campbell had to kind of keep him in tow. Douglas Campbell was my best man in marriage 48 years ago. And he and his wife are now gone to the happy hunting ground. Or, as Korzybski said, have coagulated. So that's pretty much a little bit of Alfred. And we were like, I don't know, but I have a feeling that he and I were like, almost like family friends. Now, we could talk about anything, about anyone, and lay it all out. And he was marvelously respectful of my stuff. And, we developed, and I was marvelously respectful of the magnificence of the formulations that he brought and put together. So we had this kind of mutual admiration society, and because of the respect, we had a I felt very, very keen friendship. And he'd had some kind of split with Highcala, and he carped a lot about that. But Don did a lot of pioneering, did a lot of wonderful work. He started the other journal and was an editor for all those years. And then, of course, the society figured that he was drifting too much politically to the right, so they cut him off. I think that was a big blow to Don, although he just went on, had enough money to run for Senate, which I did. I ran twice. And so that's the art. But it's the orientation, Korzybski's orientation is what catapults you, it brings you up, it gives you a quantum leap to another way of translating the world. He's talking about the evaluative process all the way through his book, and how identification is what messes it up. And so his whole book is a scientific approach to thinking or evaluating, because thinking and feeling were all split up in those days. Now the word evaluation didn't come into our general usage until Korzybski got in the act, as far as I could tell. We never talked about you evaluate something. We'd think about it, we'd have feelings about it. We never talked about evaluating it. And I think proper evaluation, which was his main theme in the map territory analogy, between trying to make your symbolic formulations fit what's going on. And that automatically led to sanity. For him, scientific approach to the evaluative process made you sane. And the people who are insane are misevaluating. And this is why he studied crazy people. You remember his story about visiting St. Elizabeth's Hospital? Did Don give you that one?
No.
Would you like that
Yes.
one?
Mm-hmm.
He went to St. Elizabeth's Hospital to study the insane evaluations. He was introduced by a psychiatrist to a fellow whom he introduced and said, Count Korzybski, I want you to meet His Excellency Julius Caesar. Korzybski said, how do you do, Your Excellency? And he went on. About 6 months later, he went back again. And this time, the same psychiatrist said, I want you to meet His Excellency Napoleon Bonaparte. And Korzybski, instead of playing it over much, he just simply said, well, when I was here 6 months ago, weren't you Julius Caesar? Now, you usually don't say that, but he came straight out with it. And the man smiled and said, of course, my dear fellow. But that was by a different mother. Now that's a beautiful map, but it doesn't fit the territory as far as we know, unless you believe in reincarnation. You get recycled, of course, that might fit. But he studied the mechanisms of distorting people, and I did the same thing with my projective techniques. He kept saying, don't rush it. Don't rush it. Don't try to make it a package, and don't push it too hard. He says, this is a kind of it has to, gradualness was his theme. Gradualness, gradualness, gradualness. But some people, of course, wanted to tie it up in a package and pound it down in any place they could. But most of us have sort of felt it'll come unless the world self-destructs before we get it.